This podcast covers a murder that occurred in 1983. It is a true story, and while I have relied heavily on police reports and public documents, the opinions of the host and interviewees are simply that, opinions, not facts. The credibility of the witnesses and what they say is to be determined by the listener. Everyone is presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. As memorable events in small towns go, the brutal murder of a young woman in the middle of the day where she worked was a nasty scab on the town's history that had never fully healed. It was a scab that had rarely even been picked at in the decades that had passed, but that scab was about to get ripped clean off. Neither the county or the city reports had ever been released, so I put together a packet of facts for every city council member, as well as Chief Davis, and brought along a couple extra for the press.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Hey, I may be totally unanimous here. That's a good sign.
Thank you very much.
Anything you want to add?
Number 2, Jimmy Decker. FOIA denial.
I'll see you in the morning then.
Okay.
As I spoke, they were all looking from me to the copies of police report pages that I had provided them, and by the looks on their faces, some of this was new and very compelling information for them, many of whom had lived in this community for all of their lives.
Okay, I'm here today to re-request, this is about an appeal for a FOIA request for information about the Janette Roberson murder. What I'm looking to get from Chief Davis and I have already...
Today I'm asking for a copy of the initial report generated by Reed City Police Department's law enforcement officers regarding the murder of Janette Roberson in the Gamble store on January 19, 1983. In the packet provided, I included 3 pages from the Michigan State Police report so you can see Detective Pratt's observations regarding which officers were present when he arrived on scene. This information pertains to my appeal. The Michigan State Police report begins when Detective Pratt arrives on scene. It is what occurred prior to his arrival that I believe is important to the public's understanding of how this scene was handled and goes straight to the heart of what the Freedom of Information Act is intended to do. There are some crucial questions about what was reported to Detective Pratt by first responders, as well as what he encountered when he arrived. The initial report, made by the Reed City officers, is the only place to learn the details of their actions and observations prior to Detective Pratt arriving on scene. Here are some concerns. Why was the county prosecutor called to the scene by one of the first responders before the arrival of the detective? Who called him and why? Why was an officer who should have been suspended helping to process the scene? And finally, Chief Philip Rathbun was the supervisor of the first responders and, as such, ultimately responsible for their activity. If he entered a crime scene and found anything of concern regarding his employees, the public has a right to know this. They have a right to know why the police chief showed up, quote, entered the immediate area where the victim was found, end quote, according to the Michigan State Police report, and then left sometime prior to when Detective Pratt arrived. Janette's daughter deserves to know if anything happened at that crime scene, or with the evidence during this time, that could ultimately lead to this case never being brought to trial. The public perception was always that Chief Rathbun was out of town when this murder occurred. That's what the public was told. In fact, in a Cadillac News article published on January 19, 2010, the 27th anniversary of Janette's death, Chief Rathbun stated that he was out of town when this murder happened. Publicly saying he was out of town gives an impression that is patently false. Someone called him. I think Janette's daughter has a right to know who that was. When did the prosecutor arrive, and who summoned him? And why? Was that standard operating procedure in 1980? We know the police chief left the scene before Detective Pratt arrived, because on page 3 of the Michigan State Police report, it is noted that, quote, after being admitted to a secure gamble store, Reed City police officers Larry Finkbeiner, Michael Primo, and Theodore Platts were recognized along with Sheriff David Needham, Under Sheriff Thomas Detloff, Detective Sergeant James Southworth, and Deputies Terry Oyster and Thomas Kingsbury of the Osceola County Sheriff's Department. It does not say that Detective Pratt encountered Chief Rathbun when he arrived, yet on page 4 of the report he writes, "It was learned through investigation that the following people had entered the immediate area of where the victim was found at least once, and some more than one time. John Ingalls, the store manager, David Ingalls, the store owner, Thomas Hawkins, a store patron, Dr. Earl Williams, medical examiner, and Chief Philip Rathbun of the Reed City Police Department." Janette Roberson lived in this town just under 2 years, and that's another overriding theme I've heard over and over from the folks who were born and raised here. It's not solved because she's not from Reed City. I don't believe that. I know too many good folks who live here, but that is the perception you are dealing with, and public perception is what this FOIA appeal is about. Her mother, Marion Fisher, was Reed City's clerk and treasurer for many years. It was a position she held when her daughter was murdered so brutally. She passed on without knowing why, and I'm not sure there will ever be justice for that. I want you to think about that when you deliberate. Put yourself in the place of Marion Fisher, of Alvin Roberson, of Jennifer Riles, Jeanette's daughter. I was in contact with Jennifer yesterday and asked her if there was anything she wanted me to pass along to you, and this is what she said. "I just want to say that if it was their mother, sister, or daughter, they would want to know who and why. They would want closure. Anything they can do that will help solve my mother's murder would be greatly appreciated." I won that appeal, and I got those reports, although very heavily redacted, and I got them because the questions I was asking were questions that the community deserved answers to. When denying reports, the governing body must weigh the right of the public to know versus how the release of that information will impact a case. Essentially, the need to know information, in this case, was that certain people, including the police chief, were at the scene, particularly when he had publicly distanced himself from that scene in multiple interviews over the years with journalists, stating that he had been out of town. I wanted to know why. One thing that happened subsequent to this council meeting and after I won the appeal was that I was contacted by the city lawyer and told that while they were getting my city documents prepared, they had also obtained a copy of the Osceola County Sheriff's Department First Responders Report. I had twice requested that report and been denied and told that it did not exist. Something else that was in the packet that I had submitted to the city council members was an allegation that I had heard over and over. The county prosecutor had been called to the scene, quote, to see if the sight of a dead body would freak him out. I thought maybe it was just gossip until I spoke to Prosecutor Talaski, and he confirmed that he had no idea why they had called him there that day. But he had certainly not been pleased with what he found. In his words, the entire Reed City PD and most of Osceola County Sheriff's Department was standing there staring at her body. He went further to say, when I asked if anyone had called Detective Pratt, someone in that crowd said, "Why?" That why segues into the next issue, and that involves the tensions between the law enforcement departments at the time, and the fact that there may have been a bit of a power struggle over who would take lead on the case. When I spoke to Lauren Thorson, who handled the crime scene evidence collection, the picture he painted didn't make me feel any better. He said he arrived later around 5:30. He had to come from Kalkaska, over an hour and a half after Jeanette's body was found, and when he entered, was immediately approached by City Officer Theodore Platts, the officer who should have been suspended at the time, and it was he who led Thorson down to the basement and began pointing out items of note. Here is what Gary McGee remembers from that day. He was one of the responding EMTs.
When we pulled up, I'm pretty sure in thinking that we didn't even have a parking. We parked right in the middle of the street. There was no parking spot. I had never been in the basement before at Gamble's. If you figure you're walking in a store, you come down the main aisle, you turn right, and then you walk, and then you do another hard right, and you go down the steps.
That's right, and that was right next to the register. The center of the store, there was a register. Yep.
Exactly. So then you go down the steps,
Uh-huh.
and there's a wall on my left.
Right.
This is what I remember, and it seems like there was a cash register on the right, and then you walk maybe, well, I don't know, maybe half the distance of the store.
Mm-hmm.
Then you kind of angle to the right a little bit, and then there's a doorway in front of you.
Okay.
Then you walk through that doorway, and then...
When you walk through that doorway, what do you see immediately when you're standing just at that, in the doorway?
I didn't. I turned to the left. Larry Finkbeiner was in front of me, so he's leading me to where the person is.
Yeah.
So I just turned to my left, and there she lay.
So you didn't pass the fish tanks to get into the door?
I don't know what was on. I don't know about fish tanks. I remember birds squawking. I would say actual time of death was within 3 to 4.
Yeah.
I don't think that her heart had actually stopped more than a half hour before we found her. I don't know I don't know when it happened, but I'm saying I don't think her heart actually stopped within a half hour before we found her.
Right. The death certificate says 3.
Yeah, about hour. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
And and in the newspaper they were saying between 2 and 4. And I know it's not an exact science, obviously.
No.
We're talking between 2 and 4 is when it happened. There were customers down there in that time period. The 2 ladies that came to buy stuff that I've talked to, Jan and Venus, they were down there with 2 little kids. They were down there for a while. They were the ones that bought the pet supplies that they were putting the plea out for in the newspaper, and then they went in and talked to state police. They didn't see anything. They didn't hear anything. One of them looked behind that tarp and didn't see anything. They were walking around. The kids were looking. They saw no blood. Nobody saw that blood. So that's another thing, the mystery blood that happened. How did nobody see that blood?
The blood in question was a spot on the floor that Officer Finkbeiner walked Gary McGee directly through when he led him down into the basement. The spot of blood on the floor was located maybe 8 to 10 feet outside the entrance to the back room through which Gary had entered. He described it as about the size of a piece of bread, and closer to the entrance to the back room than to the stairway. He didn't see the blood until he was leaving the back room to go back upstairs. At that point, he believed the initial assault may have occurred outside the back room where she was found, in the pet department, and that she had been dragged or otherwise moved to where her body would eventually be discovered, and she may have been back there with him for some period of time, perhaps in between customers.
I don't think that she died right away, because when somebody dies right away, their wounds don't bleed. Because the heart stops pumping, stops pumping, and they don't bleed.
I know. She was alive. We know. We understand. Why do you think we can't give this up? Because it's horrifying. It's fucking... I mean, I start crying half the time when I think about it. It's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to assume she was out for some of that. You would pass out for that pain.
I hope.
So
You
too.
You just have to hope as a human being that she didn't know that was happening to her.
I cannot fathom how the perpetrator felt so comfortable back there for that long, unless he was familiar enough with the comings and goings of the store that he knew it rarely got busy enough that they would be interrupted. He also knew that he'd be able to hear anyone coming down the stairs and see them through the glass tanks from the back room, both of which I can personally attest to, having been down in that basement and in the back room. If Janette's killer was that unknown dark-haired man with glasses who had crossed the barrier into the back room in the days leading up to her murder, the one making her uncomfortable enough to tell people about him, he may have known what areas of that back room he could drag her to, so that anyone in the pet department wouldn't see them. The reason that I believe it's important for the public to understand that this altercation likely began in the pet department itself rather than the back room, is that, if that is the case, someone may have seen something that they did not know was important at the time, because so much of the coverage of this case has revolved around her dying in that back room. But someone could have seen a man talking to her that day, and not realized he could have been the killer, especially if Janette was smiling at him, like she generally did, being her normal, cheerful self, kind to everyone. It appears that an impulsive, instant fit of rage precipitated what was to follow. But before the rage, were they just talking? Had he been in the store for long before the initial attack, maybe trying to chat her up? On February 10th, 1983, the Osceola County Herald ran an article titled "Murdered Clerk Had Received Calls." According to the story, Osceola County officials had discovered a new development the previous week, that Janette had allegedly received obscene phone calls and had received 2 calls in which an individual hung up the phone without speaking the day before she was murdered. These calls, coupled with the unknown man coming in and making her uncomfortable before the murder, certainly suggest that it's a possibility Janette had someone who was obsessed with her. I once heard someone say, homicides are usually just what they look like. What this looks like, to my untrained eye, is that Janette had herself a stalker who'd become obsessed with her for reasons unknown. Maybe he was attracted to her and mistook her kindness for interest. Maybe he didn't care one way or another whether she was interested or not. His interest in her was all that mattered. Whatever the case, whatever the killer felt or didn't feel about Janette, something made him lash out so viciously on January 19th, 1983. But he didn't just lash out and leave. He lashed out impulsively, and instead of getting out of there, he dragged her into the back room and added insult to injury over and over and over again, eventually leaving her partially dressed, bloody, and shoved beneath a bird cage in the back room on a dirty floor.
I don't think they got the severity of her injuries across to the public. And if they had, people might have been horrified enough to be looking at their husbands and fathers and brothers and what the hell, who did this? Obviously, they can't talk about the wounds, but someone should have gotten up to a goddamn microphone and... Excuse me, I'm going to start crying right now, but...
I'm sorry, but you're right.
So,
You're exactly right. And you got to imagine I'm a 22-year-old new paramedic living in a small town and walk into what I saw, and it just like, I even stopped at the door and went, holy shit. What?
I don't know how you handle that scene with what you saw. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know how any... That's why I try to give some slack to the first responders, because that's not something you're supposed to see. I mean,
well,
you know,
but
any human being is not supposed to see that.
No, and you know what? You can't, and don't take this wrong, you can't personalize it. And if we personalized every call we had, I would be a goddamn mess, and I wouldn't have been in this business this long.
Sometime during those initial minutes and hours after Janette's body was found, county police rushed into the Buckboard Bar next door to Gamble's. Apparently, they had landed on the possibility that the killer could have left the Gamble store somehow and come into the Buckboard Bar, cleaned up in their bathroom, and then continued on in his getaway. There really aren't any front windows on the building. I remember they came in suddenly and were emptying trash cans, going through the bathrooms. They didn't say what they were doing at first, but I did have to unlock the basement door for them. We knew there was something going on, but we didn't know what. This is the account from Carrie. She worked at the bar next door and was working on the day of the murder. She said it was slow that day, with only a few regulars at the bar, and it was sometime after lunch. They told me there had been a murder next door and they needed to check my basement. I unlocked the basement door It was padlocked, but I didn't go down with them. Carrie told me that she rarely went down into the basement to begin with, and then only to get extra mops or buckets. She was aware of a door on the front of the basement wall, below where the front door at street level would be, beneath the sidewalk, and from what the detective told her, that doorway opened into a passage that accessed the entire block below the sidewalk. These access points were once used for coal deliveries. Carrie said that she believed at that point some businesses had already had their doors blocked, so she didn't know how far the killer could have gotten around below ground at that time. But according to the police, there was at least a question at that time if the killer could have been moving around down there underground. Carrie said that the police didn't make her close the bar while they searched, but would not let any new customers inside. She was told by one of the officers that Janette had left for lunch and was murdered shortly after returning. Carrie said that she and the customers that were in the bar when they came in were questioned as a group, and they were asked questions like if anyone came in and was acting strange, or if anyone went into the bathroom for a long time, or if anyone basically saw anything out of the ordinary. They also wanted to know if any of them had been in the pet store that day, and if they had they seen anything unusual? Did anyone know Janette? Things like that. Carrie said, the thinking was that the person had maybe come in there and used the bathroom to clean up. I thought the whole theory of someone coming in there in the middle of the afternoon was ridiculous, since during the day it was usually regulars, and anyone different would surely have been noticed, especially if they had suddenly popped out of the basement. Carrie said that the police were there for about 20 or 30 minutes, and they didn't take anything out as far as evidence. When I spoke to Detective Southworth, he did confirm to me that they had at some point obtained blueprints in order to check underground access points in the basements. When I spoke to Lauren Thorson, who did the evidence collection, he was not aware of any basement-to-basement access, nor did he collect any evidence in any passageways or basement-to-basement access points.
I had seen some violent deaths, but this one was certainly very unusual in terms of where it happened and when it happened, and the multiple modalities that were used to assault this woman. So there was certainly a multitude of different kinds of injury, and that was quite unusual. I think that she was alive because there was evidence of bleeding. The consciousness is not answerable because we don't know in what order the injuries were received. If she were hit on the head first, she might have been unconscious immediately, and then the other injuries could have occurred with her not being aware of it. So because it happened during the day, when people would have been going in and out of the store, and apparently at least at some point shortly before she was found, a customer actually who had wanted to buy something in her area in the basement had to go to the main floor because they said nobody was there, and apparently that she was dead at that time. So I would expect if she were alive during much of the assault that she would have been screaming, and that would have called someone's attention to the assault. Just in a general sense, it was an amazing case because of when it occurred and the fact that when and where it occurred, during the day in a busy retail store, and no one, apparently, as far as I know, had any clue that it was going on until she was found dead. And it was so violent that one would expect there to have been some screaming or other commotion that would have called the attention of other people to what was going on, but again, no one reported hearing anything. So, and then another aspect that makes it very unusual is the multiple modalities. And so that was unusual. A final thing that to me is very unusual is that this occurred in a very small town. And generally in small towns that there's really no other towns around Reed City, and it's quite surprising that no one in the town came forward. Somebody had to have known. Small towns are not good at keeping secrets like this generally. So I'm very surprised that no one came forward and that no one was definitively found at that time to have committed this crime. That's very unusual.
Oh, I just remember, going in. My mom had to get a couple things from Gamble store anyway, then the battery, and it was just me and my mom. We went in, and one of the ladies, I think her name was Flossie, but I'm not sure. It was somebody that, my mom and dad knew that worked there. She was helping us with the batteries and stuff. And we were kind of waiting at the counter because she didn't really know much about the battery, so she was waiting for the owner to come down and help. And then I can just remember we were standing by the cash register, which is they had a cash register in the middle of the store, which is like right by where the stairs are, to go upstairs and downstairs.
Okay.
And somebody came up was looking for Janette. And she come up white as a ghost. And that's when the owner went down there. And he came up and said, well, there's nothing we can do for her. And then he made everybody leave the store, which I don't understand that. You would have thought he would have made everybody stay in the store, because that way everybody would have been there to talk to the police and all that. But
now, do you, well, let me go back first. Angie's the one that found her, so it was probably Angie that you were talking to, because Angie went down. I just wanted to clear that up just so you knew, and then for the listener. But so when you were standing there and Angie was helping you find the battery, I think you previously told me she was looking it up in a book or something. Is that right?
Yeah, looking it up, trying to find it.
Okay, so it's like one of those things where you don't know which battery goes for your specific car, so she looks it up and then they pull it off the shelf. Is that basically how it works?
Yeah. She was right in the middle of that, and they were looking for Janette.
Okay. And how is it that she's the one that ended up going down there? If she was helping you, how is it that she was the one that ended up going downstairs?
The owner asked her to go.
Okay, so a man came up that you think was the owner and asked her to go downstairs to look for Janette?
Yeah.
And so he told her to stop what she was doing and go down and look for Janette.
Yeah, then he was trying to find a battery. Then he started looking it up in a book. So he sent her downstairs, and then he was looking for the right battery.
Okay.
Angie came running. She went down the basement for something, because our storeroom was to the left of Janette's place, the storeroom was. So she went down the basement for something, evidently, because she come running up, and she put her head on the desk that we had right by the basement door there, and I thought she was having a heart attack, is what I thought.
That poor woman.
And I said, what's the matter, Angie? So I called John, and John was upstairs. John Ingalls, he was upstairs having his lunch. And he come down the steps 2 at a time, because I said, I think Angie's having a heart attack. And then she just pointed to the basement. She couldn't talk. She just pointed to the basement. So she actually was the only one that saw her, down there, gone.
Right.
And so then John ran down the basement, and then he come up and he said, close all the doors. So
who was the manager of the store?
Dave was.
Because
he was the owner.
Confusion about that,
I don't know if we even had a manager. I managed it for a while, remember?
Did you?
But
I don't know.
I took care of the books
Dave,
and all that.
You just say Dave would be the owner and manager of the whole work.
Yeah, I wouldn't think we had any manager.
So it was pretty much Dave and everyone else was employee. Okay. And when the body was found, was Mr. Ingalls there?
Mm-hmm.
Ingalls was there.
Mm-hmm. Not sure.
The problem here is we have a letter from Janette's father, and he said the store manager. And the store manager told him he was not there
when the body was found. Someone called him to the store.
Well, Dave was there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I can still see him sitting on a crate.
Like
and saying, oh my gosh, he said, I just came from Saginaw to get rid of all this stuff like murders, and here I am in my own little store, and I got a murder on my hands.
And not just
so
any
he
murder.
was there, I remember
Right.
that. But when I don't know when the heck he came in, but how people knew so quickly, because the front of that store, we went and locked the door, or John did. There was people out there that you wouldn't believe. How did they know?
You mean they were on the sidewalks looking around? Wow.
It was just something else.
Well, I wondered how quick it got.
Oh,
so you mean it was daylight and there were already people there?
I mean,
Wow.
you know, it just seemed like they just all of a sudden flocked in front of that store.
In the newspaper Herald articles, they said that Janette was getting obscene phone calls 2 days before. Did you know anything about that?
No.
Okay. All right. Did Janette talk about Alvin a lot? No. Was he there that day? I've heard was there twice that day. Someone said he brought her lunch. You don't remember seeing him at all that day?
The only thing I know is that the school must have called her and told her to come pick up one of the kids because she left, you know, before noon. And she went to school to pick up her kids, and she must have took them someplace, and then she'd come back.
How do you know? I mean, the school called her. Why couldn't somebody?
Because she said, you know, she come up and said, I got to go pick up my kids.
Okay.
Or one of the kids, I think it was a little girl from school.
Where did Janette usually eat her lunch?
She went home, or
she left the store to eat? Left? Or did she leave that day in addition to the time she went to bring her child, or did she probably grab food while she was...
Well, I don't think she left again. I mean, she went and picked up the kids.
So maybe she grabbed something while she was home and then... Sounds right, okay. So Janette worked for Ingalls. He hired her, right? Who serviced the animals? Did they purchase the animals? Who brought them in?
They were brought in from Freeland. That's where Bonnie had her shop in Freeland, you know, next to little town there by Saginaw. And Bonnie brought all those animals in, and she worked there for a while, and then they hired Janette.
So she didn't work there regularly after they hired Janette?
No.
But she
can't, I mean, I think she was more or less Janette's boss, really.
I was going to ask you that because Janette mentioned her boss as a she in a letter to her father, and I thought, you know, who's the she? So Bonnie was her boss.
Yeah.
You know who called the police?
I think John did.
Right away when he came upstairs.
And what about other customers? Do you remember seeing other customers around the register at that time or in the store?
Not around the register, but there were other customers in the store. Yeah, all of us. Everybody that was in the store walked out. We all walked out about at the same time.
And then there were people there that were held at some point, so they must have brought some of the people back in that they could find from the sidewalk. You had told me also at one point that you thought you had gone next door to Ben Franklin. Do you remember going over there instead of getting right in the car and leaving?
Yeah, we didn't get right in the car and left. We wanted to find out what was going on. And we went into Ben Franklin and looked around. Then when the cops came, we were outside. And the only cop that I remember seeing was Larry Finkbinder. I know he was there because I remember seeing him there.
Do you remember seeing him inside or outside of the store?
He was outside the store because I just remember the car pulling up and him getting out of the car.
Okay.
And that's when we left.
How long do you think it was that you guys were in the store once she was discovered? Just minutes and then you left? It was like he was hurrying to get everyone out?
Yeah, it was probably less than 5 minutes. Because there was 2 girls working, and then there was a guy in there working. And they just started at the back of the store and pushed everybody right out the front door.
Okay. And do you remember seeing anyone actually calling for calling the police while you were there?
No, I don't. I remember the guy came upstairs, said there's nothing we can do for her now. He says we got to get everybody out.
Okay. So they were trying to...
And they just started pushing everybody out, and I don't, know who called the cops. Somebody did.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then you didn't see the police till you came out of the Ben Franklin after that.
Right. I actually bought some candy or something over there.
Oh, now you said police came and spoke to you sometime after that. When was that?
I don't remember how long, but they came to the school.
Okay, up to the high school?
Yeah, and it was, I can't remember who it was. It was a detective, a state police detective.
All right. Do you remember the types of questions that they were asking you?
No, I don't. Not offhand. That's 30-some years ago.
I have stretching your memory, and you've always been so good about remembering as much as you can, so I appreciate that. So you were questioned at the school, and you say besides the manager or store owner that you saw just two women, and those were the only employees you remember seeing that day?
Yeah, that's all I remember seeing that day.
Do you remember anyone, like when after he said everyone needed to get out, do you remember them looking around to make sure that the perpetrator was not still in the store?
No. They just started at the back of the store and pushed everybody out the front door. So if the person that did it was in there, they were pushed right out the front door with everybody else.
Yeah. And then it sounds like Finkbeiner was doing the same thing, because when the EMTs rolled up, Gary McGee had a recollection of Finkbeiner standing at the front door shooing customers out too. So and I did hear that they got some of them back. And when I talked to Detective Pratt, they think they tracked everyone down that was in there. But, you never know.
Right. It's been so long ago, and me, I know a lot of people, even back then, I knew a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But if they ask me names, it's like, I don't know. Yeah. But if I see them, I don't, I know that guy,
I think a lot of people had that same thing, because when you go shopping, you're not really paying attention to stuff like that. You were thinking about the battery. You wanted the car fixed. You weren't really noting who was in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I was in there looking to get to fix my dad's car, because I didn't want to drive the damn bus to work school anymore.
That sounds like a very teenager thing. Now, there's two males that were the manager and the store owner, Dave Ingalls, and then his brother, the manager, John Ingalls. And I'm not sure which one of them that you saw. But Flossie has a recollection of calling John and saying, John, Angie's having a heart attack, and him running from...
No, I just remember the girl coming upstairs, and white as a ghost, she was running up the stairs, and she was white, and she talked to a guy. I just took it was the owner, because I saw him in there all the time. But, I remember she couldn't even talk. She was just pointing, and she said, Janette, and pointed downstairs, and he went downstairs, and he come running up the stairs, and I just remember him saying, telling the lady there's nothing we can do for her. Get everybody out.
So let me ask you, you went to the pet store regularly, didn't you? You went down there to look at stuff and browse and shop?
Yeah, the hobby part.
So when you went, what was Janette like? Describe her to me.
Janette?
Mm-hmm.
Real nice lady. I mean, I talked to her all the time. I was always talking to Janette, but my sister's boyfriend at the time was friends with her. He knew her.
And that's Dale, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was Dale.
So you guys would go in there together and just browse and chat with her?
Yeah, sometimes. Usually I was in there by myself looking at the models and, buying glue and paint and all that, because I did a lot of models.
Do you recall being there at any time or ever seeing him and Janette interact, Dale and Janette?
And how they interact?
Yeah, quite a bit.
So what did they, he's one of the people that police were, definitely looking at hard a lot in the early stages, and I think it was just because he, knew her, and I think he may have had a crush on her. What was your observation of their relationship?
He liked her. I know that.
He told you that?
Oh, yeah. And I know he lived in Meadowview, and so did she.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to go to her house all the time. He'd go down to her apartment a lot.
By himself?
Yeah.
Did that seem, she was 27, and he was what, same age as you, 17, 18?
He was younger than me.
Younger than you even? Oh. So did it seem strange that he spent time over her apartment to you? Did that seem odd, or was she just the type that let people come over?
I personally, I thought something was going on between them.
Okay. So he was over there often enough that it seemed like there might be something going on.
Yeah.
And he would go alone, or would it be a group of people that would go and hang out?
No, just him.
Well, that's interesting. And do you know from her perspective, did it look like it was just he had a crush on her, or did it look like it was possibly reciprocated by her?
I don't know. I never saw them interact with each other at Meadowview or her apartment, because I know Dale lived there, I know she lived there, and I know he was down there all the time.
Right.
Because sometimes my sister, we would go, I was friends with him too from school. And sometimes we'd go down there, go to his apartment, they'd say, no, he's down to Janette's. And we'd go down there and knock on the door, and then he would come out and we would go do whatever.
So at the time he was actually dating your sister?
Yeah.
Did she ever say anything like, why does he keep hanging out at her house? Did she seem bothered by that?
No, back then my sister didn't care.
She was younger than you?
Yeah, she's 3 years younger than me.
I see. So she was pretty young then.
Yeah, she was young and she didn't really care.
All right. Do you ever recall anything about Janette mentioning anything about divorce or hearing about it, that her and her husband might have been headed for a divorce?
I had heard rumors, from other people. It could have been Dale that told me that too. I don't remember who I heard it from.
Mm-hmm.
But I did hear it from people that they were splitting up, that her husband had a girlfriend and all that stuff.
So was it common knowledge at the time that he already had a girlfriend before she passed, before she was killed? A babysitter or something?
I'm not sure. I had heard that it was the babysitter, but I don't know for a fact.
Okay.
But I do know that they didn't hide it. I mean, you'd see her riding around with him all the time in his car.
Oh, really? What kind of car was it? Do you remember?
He had an old Chevy Nova.
Ah, so you actually saw the babysitter and him riding around before Janette's murder?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
That's why I didn't think nothing of Dale being down there. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'd heard things, and, well, her and her husband are splitting up, so whatever.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't really heard that you had actually seen them together, but there was enough gossip that I was thinking that there was something to it, so they must have been at some point in their relationship where there was divorce being discussed, at least. Now, let me ask you this. It was reported in the newspaper that someone had been coming into the store and making her uncomfortable in the days leading up to the murder, and also that she was getting obscene phone calls. Did she ever mention this to you, or did you ever hear about it before the murder?
No, I'd never heard anything like that before. I had heard it afterwards.
Right.
Besides Dale, was there any other males that you can think of that hung around her more than just a little bit, or the average that you can recall?
No, not that I can recall.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Does anything now, after all these years, you've had a lot of time to think about it. I've talked to you, God knows how many times I've bothered you like crazy, and you've been really a good sport about it. Is there anything that stands out to you about her murder now that didn't occur to you then, that occurs to you now?
Well, there's a couple funny things that I don't understand. It was like days after the murder, her husband left. I don't know if it was pre-planned or what. It just seemed kind of strange to me. You know, and it wasn't just to me. It was, you know, a lot of people were talking about that.
Yeah, I definitely heard a lot about that. In the police report, though, it says he didn't leave town until like 8 months later, until September. Now, I don't know if he, if he had gone for a weekend or something away, but he didn't end up moving away until about September of that year.
I know that after the murder, like a few days after the murder, you never saw his car again.
Really? Do you think he was staying somewhere else besides the apartment?
He wasn't staying in the apartment after it.
I wonder, if there was some talk, I remember Chief Davis saying on TV that they were living apart or separated. I wonder if he wasn't even living there at the time.
He might not have been. I'm not real sure. I remember his car sitting there once in a while, though.
Well, he might have gone over to see the kids or watch them or whatever when she was working.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of makes sense now that you're saying that, Mark, that you didn't remember seeing the car thereafter. It does sort of back up what Chief Davis had said about how that they may have been separated at the time, and maybe he was staying with the babysitter. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, she was a lot younger.
Yeah, she was your age, right? And that
she was younger than me, I believe. My age or a year younger than me.
The Michigan State Police report says the original investigators did identify some persons of interest, but had not enough information on any of them for an arrest.
Could it have been somebody with an infatuation with her? Yes. Is that a possibility? Yes.
Months, years, decades passed, and still, to this day, no arrests, no charges, not even a suspect.
There is no true suspect at this point. I think we have more hope than we did 10 years ago with people calling in the activity.
Hope for a break in the investigation, maybe even a deathbed confession. Something to solve Janette's horrific murder once and for all.
I still think there's a 50-50 chance. I'm not going to lean one way or the other because my hope is that we can put closure to this.